starting back up. So we've already talked about the TEKS, alignment, how we're going to form the committee, which is comprised of teachers, educators, community leaders. I want to ask you a question. What is the acronym for TEKS?
The acronym for TEKS is Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills.
Right. And those particular TEKS drives the curriculum. And that was the main heart, the main idea of that first presentation, the TEKS, and starting with the end in mind. Are there any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Love, I have a question. Could you explain how the TEKS objectives are created?
Yes. When we talk about the creation, that's a great question, of the TEKS objective. It's created by the state. And what the state does is they have a committee, just as we're trying to produce. They have a committee, and they say these are the things that these students need to know in order to be productive, in order to go out into the real world. And so they sit down and create the basic knowledge and skills first, but they also analyze the word rigor. What is rigor? And rigor is basically having that curriculum that's set up so that students can have that knowledge and skills so they can be successful when they go out. Whatever path they may take, whether it's college, whether it's starting their own business, whether it's production, whatever they start out with, these particular standards, these TEKS, are aligned for that purpose. And so you have individuals who actually study education, who actually go out and see what students need, and they're able to create these particular standards.
So from a classroom perspective, what does preparation look like for the students and teachers?
The preparation of,
Preparing for the TEKS.
okay, preparing for the TEKS. That's a great question. That's a great question. When we prepare for the particular TEKS, every day within our classroom, right, we have lesson plans. These lesson plans guide teachers into understanding what students need. And we utilize the TEKS and the pacing guide, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, in order to make sure that we're teaching those standards. So when it's time for testing, which we've completed one section of testing, when it's time for testing, those students will understand what concepts are expected. So what this is a planned ordeal in which we sit down, just like you are, and we sit down with our team, and we come up with, we have the TEKS and we have a pacing guide. And with that pacing guide and the TEKS, we're able to form what we call objectives, and we're able to form the product, we're able to form activities, or we're able to form different assignments that will help prepare the students for success on those particular areas. Did that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
it did.
What is the line instruction?
Okay, that's a great question as well. Aligned instruction means that we take the particular TEKS objective, and also we have not only the TEKS, but we have our pacing guide, okay? And any type of instruction that we have, for instance, this assignment may relate to figure 19. And so we have our lessons planned out for figure 19, and we look at our TEKS to make sure that it's aligned. So the TEKS drives everything. In all of the assignments that we have, we make sure that we connect it, that we tie it to a particular TEKS. Does that make sense? Any more questions on that?
And for the curriculum, are most of the classroom assignments individual based, or do y'all have the students collaborate, or what? How does that go? Do y'all have a mixture of both individual assignments and collaboration, or how does that work?
All right, that's a great question. We have a mixture of individual assignments and collaboration. Now, there comes a time in which we have where students think, turn, and talk. We have assignments where students are able to engage in projects, and we also have individualized instruction, because on tests it's very individualized. Students aren't collaborating with each other, but different activities, some activities calls for the collaboration of students. And with the collaboration, we want to make sure that we remain on task and that it doesn't come like a social session. See, it always has to be purposeful. You know, when we put students in groups, we have to assign the students to the group, assign the students a job within that group, and make sure that we're monitoring, actively monitoring, so that students can remain on task. So yeah, there's a mixture. There's individualized, and there's also collaboration between students as well. And this collaboration, especially when we're dealing with English, when students are reading a passage and they come up with an answer, two students may come together and say, okay, I have answer A and I have answer B. Justify your answer, which means explain where is that answer at in the passage. And then they come up and they speak to each other. It's like a debate, but not really. It's basically saying why you have this answer. And they're able to gain knowledge from each other, the knowledge that they may not gain from just individualized instruction. So sometimes, yes, individualized, and sometimes it is with the group.
Cool.
How can teachers effectively start with the end in mind?
Okay, teachers can effectively start with the end in mind through planning. And what I say about planning is basically data is very essential. So when you're planning for your lessons, you want to make sure that it's data driven. You want to make sure that you're also analyzing the TEKS. And you want to make sure that you have an intervention session for those students who may not grasp the concept at first. So you always want to make sure that you're planning. Planning is very essential. And have those TEKS, have those interventions, differentiated instruction that we're going to talk about in a minute in order to meet the needs of all students. Are there any more questions?
I like this, like with the text, you know, like say, there are different parts of the test. So, like say for instance, should there be just all English teachers in a group with a team to discuss the English sessions of the TEKS, the material that they would need? Is it separated, what I'm saying, or should all teachers come in together, or there's just a team of English teachers who teach English, a team of math teachers, and different teachers like that, different sessions of it?
Okay, that's a great question. Now, in some instances, in some places that I've worked, there have been just plain English, talking about just only English. In other places, there's been an integration. When we talk about integrated instruction, when we talk about differentiated and integration of instruction, trying to get math and science together, then there is a collaboration between the teachers. Now, there has been professional development where all the teachers come together and say these are the best practices. Where this may work in math, this strategy may also work in English. And so it just depends on the location where you are. It's very essential that all of the English teachers come together. And it's very essential that there's also a mixture, because some of the strategies can be transferred. But when we're talking about the integration of subjects, it's very meaningful to have everyone come together and collaborate. And usually that's detected in professional development. All right. So our next section that we're going to discuss is Objective 3, the Curriculum Pacing Guide. And I think about running when I think about pacing. I always tell students, we have to be in a particular area within our learning. And so my job as the coach, as the teacher, as the administrator is to get you where you need to be. That's the pacing guide. The pacing guide is a place in which you'll have the TEKS, and it tells you, okay, on this 2 days or 3 days, you need to be teaching this, okay? And then we have our intervention groups, because some individuals may not grasp it the first time. You have to differentiate, you have to scaffold, you have to come up with different plans for students to become successful. And so with this pacing guide, we ensure that the lessons are spiraled. So when we look at different curriculum, okay, so we have our committee, now we're analyzing the curriculum. We want to make sure that the lessons spiral. And spiraling means that the lessons, for instance, if I teach inferencing this week, then I'm teaching another concept next week, I need to be able to combine those two together so that the student can build on their previous knowledge and skills. Because all TEKS is, and all the pacing guide is building. It's building on the knowledge. But sometimes what happens is that one can teach inferencing, and then the student forgets it, and the next week there's another concept, they understand it, and then the next week another concept, and it's no connect. And so what happens is, the material is taught, but it's not built upon. Think about a building. When you have bricks, all right? If you're building up a building and you take out one brick, what happens? collapse. So if we're building for our students and there's a gap, then they're not going to understand the concept. For instance, in math, you have to learn how to add and subtract and divide before you can participate in algebra. You know, you have to know algebra before you can get into trig. And so it's a building block. And so the goal with the TEKS and the pacing guide is to build student knowledge. That's what TEKS is, to build student knowledge. Okay? Any questions with that? All right. Another thing that we want to ensure is that the lessons are aligned. Now, we've spoken about alignment with this pacing guide. Make sure that it's aligned. Also, that they present real life experiences. One of the lessons, the best lessons, is to be able to draw on student experiences. How do you do that? By asking students. You know, we're reading a book. For instance, there was a book entitled Ribsy, and Ribsy was a dog who had human characteristics, personification. You know, in looking at that particular book, now students know that dogs are not supposed to talk. But how is your dog like Ribsy? Gets into everything, chews up everything, messes things up, you know? And so when we look at that, we want to make sure that the lesson plans are real life experience, they're aligned, and we want to make sure that we're running at the pace that we're supposed to run. Now, is everyone going to run at the same pace or learn at the same pace? Of course not. That's why we have interventions. That's why we have committees who sit here and come up with curriculum, as we're going to talk about, that helps each student. Each student should have an individualized plan. Each student. And so it's very important that we're able to differentiate our instruction. Assessments. Assessments are very important because sometimes what happens is when we purchase materials as administrators, superintendents, teachers, we purchase these materials and the materials seem like they fit the culture that we serve. However, it's not research-based, and there's a disconnect. They have assessments in there, but it's not aligned. So when it's time for testing, it looks foreign because it's not aligned. And so the dream is to have curriculum and instruction that's also aligned to the assessment. And what I mean by aligned, I don't mean memorization. I mean those same TEKS needs to transfer over to the test because there's a disconnect. And so you hear about different schools who may be not acceptable and things like that. Well, there's a disconnect when we look at the TEKS and we look at the assessments. And so we have to come together. That's why it's important. That's why I want more workshops about how to align. Alignment is critical. It's important. Not only do we align the instruction, but the assessment needs to be aligned. And I have this in my PowerPoint. We're going to talk about it a little bit later. The dream is to have different educators, whether it be teachers, superintendents, to sit down with the state who actually develop these TEKS and help create the TEKS and the assessment that is going to be aligned so that students can be successful and move forward. That's the goal. Okay? All right. So that's objective 3. When we look at assessments, this assessment is a word that basically allows one to understand what students know and what they need interventions with. And so with this assessment, we want to make sure, as I said before, they're aligned with the state standards. How do we do that? Well, it takes communication. It takes researching. What is it in these TEKS that needs to be covered so that these students can pass these assessments? And it's not remote memorization or teaching to the test. It's building those knowledge and skills which TEKS was developed for. Then we talk about develop assessments projects centered around the lessons. So when we look at and analyze our different TEKS and things of that nature, we want to make sure that it's all centered around the TEKS. And it's repetition. You know, you have questions, kids ask, well, why do we continuously work on main idea? Why do we continuously work on this? Because that is what we have to understand. We can move forward, but you have to grasp this concept before you understand about inferencing. You know, you have to be able to inference before you understand about context clues. You have to be able to understand persuasion and expository text and the format and how to write it and understand it. It's a building process. And so it is repetition. The analogy that I provide is when you play sports, right? Repetition. You continuously work on the same play. We're gonna come back in just a second, and we're gonna continue this